There's just something about like a handcrafted leather journal, or like a beautifully worn in saddle. You just don't get that from something mass produced, right? It speaks to a different time, a different kind of skill. And that's kind of what we're diving into today, leather goods manufacturing.
It is fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, there's definitely been like a resurgence. We've been hearing a lot about that lately.
Mm.
These traditional trades coming back,
Hmm.
and leather work. Yeah, it seems like it's having a moment.
Absolutely, yeah. And you sent over a whole stack of articles and guides, even some info on this platform called RoleCatcher. So I think it's safe to say you're more than just a little curious about about this whole career path. What I found really interesting though is how much deeper it goes than just, those classic images of like a cobbler hammering away in their shop.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. There's definitely more to it than meets the eye. And frankly, I think some of those romantic notions we have about these jobs, they don't always line up with the reality.
Ooh. Okay, I like where this is going. I like where this is going. Let's do some myth busting then. Huh. First of all, when we say leather goods manufacturing technician, what are we actually talking about? Like what does a typical day even look like for someone in that role?
Well, I mean, it is a very hands-on craft. You're
Mm.
working with leather. You're using tools to cut, shape, assemble different pieces. Um, but those tools, they can range from traditional hand tools like awls and edge bevelers to much more modern machinery. It really depends on the scale and the style of what's being made.
So it's not all like rustic workshops and the smell of leather. There's a modern manufacturing element to it too.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And this is where those client demands we were talking about earlier, that's really where they come in. One of the sources you sent mentioned this rising demand for bespoke handcrafted items. So
Yeah.
things like custom designed bags, belts, even furniture.
Right. Yeah, and I noticed one of the job descriptions you sent over was for a technician who actually works with a high-end interior design firm to create like custom leather accents for their projects. So it's not just about making saddles anymore.
Exactly, exactly. And that client interaction piece, that's really key. Being able to take a customer's vision and then translate that into an actual tangible product. Understanding different leather types, understanding their properties, all of that's becoming more and more important in this field.
Yeah, that makes sense. But then how do you even get your foot in the door if those communication and design skills are so important?
That's where experience really comes in. A
Yeah.
lot of the sources you sent mentioned apprenticeships and internships, and they said they're just invaluable ways to learn those really nuanced skills from people who've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
It's not just about like learning the technical stuff. It's about developing that eye for detail, that understanding of quality.
So it's interesting because we often think of AI as like potentially replacing these skilled trades, right? But
Yeah.
but what if it can actually make them more accessible? That platform you mentioned, RoleCatcher, one of the articles said it can analyze job descriptions to help you identify the skills that you're missing. And I'm wondering if someone could use that to like reverse engineer their ideal apprenticeship.
That's a really interesting thought because you're right. It's not always clear what skills to focus on,
Mm.
especially when you're just starting out.
Okay, but let's get real for a second.
Hmm.
The the sources also hinted that this isn't all, glamorous, right? This is physically demanding work. And I'd
Uh,
imagine there's a certain level of repetitive motion that comes with it.
yeah, that's true. That's true. And it is important to be realistic about those aspects of the job. Working with leather, especially thicker hides, it can be really tough on your hands, your back. You need stamina, you need a certain amount of strength. And some people really they thrive on that kind of meditative, repetitive nature of certain tasks. But for others, they might find it tedious. It really depends.
See, and that actually reminds me of something from those RoleCatcher articles. They mentioned how their AI can actually analyze not just your hard skills, but also your soft skills, like your work style preferences to help you find a better fit.
Yeah, it's all about self-awareness, right?
Right. Yeah.
Understanding your own strengths and weaknesses. That's key in really any career, but especially in a physically demanding field like this one.
Right, right. So it's not just about like romanticizing the craft, but being honest with yourself about whether you can handle those not so glamorous parts.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads us to the question of how do you even know if this is the right path for you?
That's a great question, and it's something that I think um, we can dive into a little bit deeper when we come back. But I will say, it seems like you're already asking yourself the right questions, and that curiosity, that willingness to look beyond the surface, that's a great sign that you're on the right track.
And we're back. Still kind of geeking out over here about leatherwork. But right before we took a little break there, we were talking about how important it is to, be honest with yourself about what your work style is, like what you actually enjoy doing.
It's so important, and it can be like a really tough question to answer,
Mhm.
especially if you're, drawn to that artistry of leatherwork, but maybe not so sure about like the reality of, say, repetitive tasks or
Yeah.
physically demanding work.
Right. Yeah. And that's where like those insights from the RoleCatcher stuff, that's what I found so interesting. I mean, who knew, right?
Yeah.
AI that can analyze not just your skills, but your actual personality and your work style preferences. That's wild.
Yeah. It's amazing how this technology can help you uncover these like hidden patterns in your own work habits.
Hmm.
For instance, one of the sources mentioned that RoleCatcher can actually analyze like your past experiences and even your online activity to figure out like what kind of work environments you actually thrive in. So are you someone who loves a bustling workshop, or are you more comfortable in a quiet or more solitary setting? It's like that kind of insight I think can be incredibly valuable when you're trying to decide if this field is even a good fit for you.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be super valuable because, there's that initial excitement, right? Of discovering a new craft or new skill, but then there's that reality of actually doing that work day in and day out. And those two things, they don't always match up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. And,
That
and I think that's where that whole conversation about apprenticeships, I think that's where that gets really, really interesting because it's not just about mastering a certain set of skills. It's about immersing yourself in the culture of a particular workshop or a studio. It's about observing the people who've been doing this work for years
Mhm.
and really understanding like their rhythms, their challenges, even their rewards.
So it's almost like an apprenticeship is as much about observing and absorbing as it is about the actual like hands-on
Like
training.
100%.
You're
Yeah.
not just learning how to stitch a seam, but you're learning how to be a leather worker,
Yeah,
right?
precisely.
Yeah.
And that's where that attention to detail comes in. That
Yeah.
willingness to put in the hours,
Yeah.
to embrace those repetitive tasks as part of the process. Even when they're not, glamorous.
Mhm.
It's funny because it almost sounds like a contradiction, right? Like finding beauty and satisfaction in those seemingly mundane, repetitive tasks, and yet I think that's really at the heart of so many of these traditional crafts.
Absolutely. And it's something that it seems like we're rediscovering in our modern world.
Mm.
This idea of slowing down, finding meaning in the process, in the actual making, not just the end result.
I love that. Okay, but okay, let's say someone's listening to this right now and they're thinking like, okay, this is kind of cool. I'm kind of intrigued, but like how do I find an apprenticeship and how do I stand out? Because I imagine it's a pretty competitive field. Like where do you even begin?
Well, good news is you already have begun.
Yeah.
I mean, by immersing yourself in this research, by reaching out to us here at the Deep Dive, you're already demonstrating that curiosity, that initiative, and that's so important in this field.
It's about being proactive. Just taking that first step, even if it feels small.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And beyond that, I mean, there are some more practical steps you can take too. Several of the sources that you sent mentioned networking, like attending industry events, maybe reaching out to local artisans, even connecting with people online.
Oh, and I'm remembering now. This is another area where RoleCatcher could be helpful because one of their features is it's like this AI powered networking tool, right?
Mm.
That connects you with people in your field
Mm.
based on like your skills, your goals, all of that.
It's really amazing to see how technology can play a role in something that we often think of as a very traditional face-to-face profession.
Right. It's like bridging that gap between the old and the new.
Yeah.
The digital and the tactile. But speaking of tactile, we've talked a lot about the abstract parts of this career path, but I'm kind of dying to dive into the actual tools and materials here.
Oh, I was hoping you'd say that because there's a whole world of fascinating craftsmanship waiting to be explored, from the different types of leather and their unique properties
Mm.
to the tools that people have been using for centuries to transform
Yeah.
these raw materials into works of art.
All right, so let's let's talk tools.
What's
Because
on?
I have to admit, I have a bit of a fascination with those classic leatherworking tools.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
the awls, the edge bevelers, the
Yeah.
stitching punches. There's something so beautiful, so timeless about them.
Okay, yeah.
I'm ready to geek out about this too. We've talked about like the skills and the mindset, all that, but what about the actual tools of the trade? I keep picturing those classic images, right? Like the craftsman hunched over his workbench, carefully guiding a stitching all through like this thick piece of leather. Just it seems so tactile and precise.
Yeah, there's a really unique satisfaction that comes from working with your hands,
Mhm.
especially with tools that have been like refined over generations. And you're right, those traditional tools they are definitely still very much in use today. That stitching all you mentioned, that's a great example. That's essential for any kind of hand stitching. Creates those really durable, aesthetically pleasing seams. That's a hallmark of quality leatherwork for sure.
You know, I tried I attempted a little DIY leather project once. Was trying to make like a simple card holder.
Yeah.
And let's just say I gained a whole new appreciation for the skill that it takes to actually use those tools correctly. My stitches were, well, let's just call them rustic.
Yeah, even the most experienced leather workers, they'll tell you it's a journey. It's all about continuous learning. But you've reminded me of something really important. There's a huge difference between like those early attempts, and then actually mastering those techniques to the point where you can create professional quality goods.
Yeah.
That takes practice. It takes patience and honestly a willingness to embrace those happy accidents along the way.
Speaking of happy accidents, how much experimentation is there in leatherworking? I imagine there's got to be a balance, right? Between following traditional techniques and trying new things.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, a lot of the innovation that we're seeing in the field, it actually comes from blending those old world techniques at craftsmanship and blending that with new ideas, new materials. One of the sources you sent, I think it was, mentioned this growing trend of using plant-based dyes and finishes.
Oh wow, that's interesting. So it's not even just about the tools and the techniques then. It's about like staying curious, right? Adapting to those changing consumer preferences that we were talking about earlier. Which reminds me, we haven't even really gotten into the materials themselves.
Right. And that's a whole other deep dive right there. I mean,
Yeah.
the type of leather that you choose, that can drastically impact the final product, like its durability, how it feels, even how it looks. I mean, there's a world of difference between, say, like a full grain vegetable tanned leather and then something like a more uh, pliable chrome tanned leather.
It's amazing how much goes into every decision, the type of thread, the finishing touches, all of it. Just it makes you appreciate those handcrafted goods so much more, knowing like the level of thought, of skill that goes into every little detail.
It really does. And I think that's something worth remembering. Whether you're thinking about this as a career or just, as a curious consumer, there's a story behind every single handcrafted leather good.
Hmm.
It's this blend of tradition and innovation and that individual touch of the maker.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. You know, it strikes me as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive here, that what we've been talking about, it goes way beyond just, leather work. It's really about the value of craftsmanship in a world that so often prioritizes, speed and mass production.
Absolutely, yeah. I couldn't agree more. There's just something. There's a certain kind of magic in taking raw materials and through skill, through dedication,
Yeah.
transforming those into something that is both beautiful and enduring.
It's about reconnecting with that sense of artistry,
Yeah.
slowing down, appreciating the process, not just the end result. And who knows, maybe this deep dive has sparked a little something in your listener, maybe a newfound appreciation for this world of handcrafted leather goods. And hey, maybe it's even inspired you to try a little DIY project of your own, stitching all not required. But definitely encouraged. Thanks for joining us.